Rihanna heard a pregnant cleaning lady singing her song. What happened next changed her life forever. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what city you are from. The arena stretched out in silence, its vast emptiness broken only by the soft hum of ventilation and the distant buzz of stage lights being tested. Rows of empty seats curved around the stage like silent sentinels, waiting for the surge of life that would soon fill them. Rihanna stepped out from the dimly lit corridor, her heels clicking softly against the polished concrete floor. She paused for a moment, letting her eyes sweep across the cavernous space. She had grown accustomed to this feeling, standing in the void before the storm, before the cheers, the lights, and the music that would soon vibrate through every corner. This moment, just before the chaos of preparation began, was hers alone. It was the rare sliver of solitude where she could breathe and remind herself of the journey that had led her here. The weight of expectation hung on her shoulders as it always did. Fans, critics, producers, they all demanded something from her. Perfection, brilliance, magic. Rihanna thrived on it, yet there were times when the pressure felt like a tightrope stretched over a canyon. She had to stay balanced, never faltering, never falling. She walked slowly toward the stage, letting her fingertips brush against the edge of one of the seats. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and cleaning products, a reminder that behind the glamour of performances, there were teams of unseen workers ensuring every detail was flawless. And then she heard it. A voice. It was faint at first, barely more than a whisper, carried by the acoustics of the empty hall. But there was something in it that made Rihanna stop mid-step. She turned her head slightly, listening. It wasn't part of the sound check. Those hadn't started yet. And it didn't sound rehearsed or polished. It was raw, unfiltered, and heartbreakingly beautiful. She followed the sound, her heels no longer clicking as she moved softly up the side steps, ascending toward the higher rows of seats. The voice grew clearer. A woman singing one of Rihanna's songs. But this wasn't a performance. The words trembled, each note weighted with emotion that seeped into the empty hall like a confession. Rihanna reached the top row and finally saw her. A young woman stood in the aisle, dressed in a faded gray uniform and pushing a mop across the floor. She was pregnant, her rounded belly prominent beneath the loose fabric of her shirt. Her dark skin glistened with sweat, and strands of hair had escaped from her ponytail, sticking to her forehead. She moved methodically, her hands gripping the mop handle with practiced precision, yet her voice betrayed a vulnerability that her body tried to hide. The woman didn't see Rihanna at first. She kept singing, her voice dipping into the chorus with a rawness that sent chills down Rihanna's spine. For a moment, Rihanna didn't want to interrupt. She wanted to let the song play out, to listen to every word sung back to her through someone else's story. But then the woman turned and froze. The mop handle slipped slightly in her grip, and her eyes widened. She stared as if she wasn't sure whether she was imagining things. Rihanna took a small step closer, offering a gentle smile. "It's okay," Rihanna said softly, hoping to ease the tension in the woman's face. But the woman stepped back slightly, her expression flickering between embarrassment and disbelief. I didn't know anyone was here," the woman stammered. Her voice, now stripped of melody, sounded smaller, like she was trying to make herself invisible. "It's okay," Rihanna repeated, her smile unwavering. "I just heard you singing. You have a beautiful voice." The woman's face flushed, and she gripped the mop tighter as if it were a lifeline. "I was just cleaning," she said quickly, her eyes darting toward the bucket of soapy water at her feet. "I didn't mean to bother anyone." "You weren't bothering me," Rihanna assured her. "What's your name?" The woman hesitated, her shoulders tense as if she expected to be scolded. "Karen," she said finally. Rihanna nodded. "Nice to meet you, Karen." There was a moment of silence, broken only by the distant hum of the arena lights. Karen shifted uncomfortably, her gaze dropping to the floor. "You sing like someone who's done it before," Rihanna said gently. Karen shook her head quickly, but her expression betrayed her denial. "No, I'm just messing around. It's nothing," she said. But there was something in her voice, a crack of vulnerability that told Rihanna there was more to the story. Rihanna took another step closer, lowering herself into one of the seats and gesturing for Karen to join her. "Sit down for a second," Rihanna said. "You don't have to keep mopping while we talk." Karen hesitated but eventually set the mop aside and sat down 2 seats away. She rested her hands on her lap, twisting her fingers nervously. For the first time, Rihanna noticed the exhaustion in Karen's posture, the slight hunch of her shoulders, the dark circles under her eyes, and the way she kept pressing a hand to her lower back, as if trying to ease an ache that never quite went away. "How far along are you?" Rihanna asked softly, glancing at Karen's stomach. 7 months, Karen replied. Rihanna nodded, letting the answer settle between them. She wanted to ask more, but something told her not to push too hard yet. Instead, she waited. And after a long pause, Karen began to speak. Her voice was quiet at first, halting as if she was afraid to share too much, but the words began to flow, pieces of her story spilling out like water through cracks in a dam. She talked about growing up loving music, about auditioning for a local girl group and being turned down because her skin was too dark. She talked about her mother falling ill, about having to give up everything to take care of her. She talked about meeting a man who promised to stay, but left as soon as he found out she was pregnant. And now, here she was, pregnant, alone, and working long hours to keep herself and her sick mother afloat. Rihanna listened, her heart sinking with each word. She could see the pain in Karen's eyes, the way her voice trembled when she spoke about the doors that had closed in her face. But she also saw something else: strength. Karen had survived everything thrown at her, and somehow she was still standing, still singing. By the time Karen finished, Rihanna felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to say something comforting, something that would make it all better. Instead, she simply reached out and touched Karen's hand. "You don't have to do this alone," Rihanna said softly. Karen looked at her, tears brimming in her eyes, and for the first time that night, hope flickered in Karen's expression. Karen sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes darting to the mop she had leaned against the seat beside her. She looked as if she was ready to bolt at any moment, but something in Rihanna's calm presence kept her grounded. The words she had just spoken still lingered in the air, fragile and raw. Rihanna gave her time. She knew how delicate these moments could be. Karen had just cracked open a door to her past, but stepping all the way through would take courage. Rihanna waited, offering no pressure, only the quiet reassurance of her presence. After a long pause, Karen spoke again. Her voice was softer now, as though letting out the truth had drained the weight from her chest but left her exposed. "I wasn't always cleaning floors," Karen began, her eyes fixed on a distant point in the arena. "I used to sing, not just around the house or in church, like really sing." Rihanna leaned slightly forward, her interest piqued. She had sensed it the moment she'd heard Karen's voice echo through the empty hall. There was history there, a story tangled in every note. Karen shifted in her seat, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "When I was 17, I auditioned for this girl group," she said, her words hesitant at first, but gaining strength as the memories surfaced. "They were supposed to be the next big thing. I spent weeks practicing, skipping school just so I could rehearse." Her lips twitched into a faint, fleeting smile, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "I killed the audition," she said, her voice tinged with the ghost of pride. "I knew it, and so did everyone in the room, even the judges." Rihanna felt a pang in her chest, already anticipating where the story was going. "But after I sang, one of them pulled me aside. He said I had talent, but—" Karen paused, her hands curling into fists. "He said I didn't have the right look, said I was too dark, too plain, and wouldn't fit the image they were going for." Rihanna inhaled sharply, the sting of those words hitting her as if she had heard them herself. She knew that kind of rejection, the way it could claw at your confidence and make you question your worth. Karen's voice hardened. "I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, but it did. It mattered every time I looked in the mirror and saw what they saw. Someone who wasn't enough, not pretty enough, not light enough." Her shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her. "After that, I stopped singing, stopped trying. I figured if the world had already decided who I was, why bother fighting it?" Rihanna's heart ached as she listened. She had faced obstacles in her own career, but Karen's story was a cruel reminder of how deeply rooted discrimination could be, how it could silence voices before they even had a chance to be heard. "What happened after that?" Rihanna asked gently. Karen let out a breath and leaned back in the seat, one hand instinctively resting on her stomach. "My mom got sick," she said. "It started with little things, forgetting where she put her keys, missing appointments. Then it got worse. Doctors said it was early onset dementia. She couldn't work, couldn't even take care of herself." Karen's voice faltered, and she took a moment to steady herself. "I dropped everything. School, music, friends. I let it all go so I could be there for her. I didn't mind, you know. She's my mom. She raised me on her own and did everything for me. Taking care of her was the least I could do." Rihanna reached out, resting a hand lightly on Karen's arm. "But it wasn't easy," Karen continued. "The bills piled up, the medication, the doctors, the rent. I took whatever jobs I could find, and none of them lasted long. People don't want to hire someone who has to leave early or take time off all the time." She looked down at her worn-out shoes, her voice dropping lower. "And then I met him. Scott. He made me feel like things could be different, like I wasn't just surviving. We talked about building a life together, a family. And when I told him I was pregnant—" Karen's breath hitched and her eyes filled with tears. "He said he wasn't ready for a family, said he couldn't handle it." Her voice cracked. "And then he left, just like that." Rihanna felt anger bubble up inside her. She knew men like Scott, men who promised the world but disappeared the moment things got hard. Karen wiped her eyes quickly, as if embarrassed to cry in front of someone like Rihanna. "I didn't have time to fall apart," Karen said. "I had to keep working. I had to keep a roof over our heads, for my mom, and now for the baby." She looked down at her stomach, rubbing it gently. "So here I am, scrubbing floors and singing to myself when no one's around, trying not to think about what could have been." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with all the unspoken pain Karen hadn't voiced aloud until now. But Rihanna saw more than just pain. She saw resilience. "You didn't stop," Rihanna said after a long pause. "No matter what life threw at you, you didn't give up." Karen let out a shaky laugh. "Doesn't feel like I've accomplished much." "But you have," Rihanna insisted. "You're still here. You're still fighting. And I can hear it in your voice. You still have something to say." Karen shook her head, but her lips twitched upward, almost as if she wanted to believe Rihanna's words. "Maybe I used to," Karen said softly, "but not anymore." "You're wrong," Rihanna said, her tone firm but kind. "You're wrong, and I'm going to prove it to you." Karen looked at her, startled. "What do you mean?" Rihanna smiled, a spark of determination lighting up her eyes. "Just trust me," Rihanna said. "You're not done yet, Karen. Not even close." Karen didn't respond right away, but something shifted in her expression, a flicker of hope where there had only been resignation. And for the first time in a long while, Karen allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was still room for a dream to grow. Karen's fingers trembled as she clutched the edges of her coat. She stood outside the small community center, staring at the faded sign above the door. It wasn't grand or impressive, just an old brick building with chipping paint and mismatched windows. But to her, it felt like the threshold to something terrifying and unfamiliar. Rihanna had insisted this was only the beginning, a first step toward reclaiming the life Karen had thought was long out of reach. Yet, as she stood there, her stomach twisted with nerves. She felt exposed, like everyone inside would take one look at her, pregnant, exhausted, dressed in second-hand clothes, and immediately decide she didn't belong. But she wasn't alone. Rihanna stood beside her, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back into a loose bun. Despite her effortless elegance, she exuded warmth rather than intimidation. She gave Karen a reassuring smile, one that softened the sharp edge of Karen's fears. "You ready?" Rihanna asked. Karen's breath hitched. Was she? Could she really step into that building and risk being told again that she wasn't good enough? She looked down at her swollen belly, resting a protective hand over it. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. Rihanna touched her arm. "You don't have to be perfect today. You just have to show up. That's enough." Karen swallowed hard, nodded, and followed Rihanna through the doors. The small rehearsal room smelled faintly of wood polish and sheet music. A group of singers stood in a loose semicircle, chatting and warming up their voices. Karen's heart pounded as their eyes flicked toward her, sizing her up. Rihanna stepped forward, speaking to the group's director, a middle-aged woman with curly gray hair and no-nonsense expression. They exchanged a few words before the woman gestured for Karen to come closer. "This is Karen," Rihanna said, her voice steady and confident. "She's here to audition." The director arched an eyebrow. "Audition, huh?" She looked Karen up and down, and Karen fought the urge to shrink under the scrutiny. "She's good," Rihanna added, leaving no room for doubt. Karen wanted to object, to say she wasn't ready, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, the director handed her a sheet of music and pointed toward the piano. "Let's hear it then," she said. Karen's knees felt weak as she walked to the center of the room. She smoothed her hands over her clothes, feeling every wrinkle in the fabric. The pianist played the opening chords, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Karen forgot how to breathe. But then she closed her eyes. She let herself imagine she was back in the empty arena, singing to no one but herself. Her voice came out soft at first, fragile and uncertain, but as the melody wrapped around her, she felt the tension start to ease. She clung to the lyrics, letting them carry her through. By the time she reached the chorus, something shifted. Her voice swelled, finding strength she hadn't known she still possessed. The room seemed to shrink, and for the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. When the last note faded, Karen opened her eyes. The room was silent. Then, slowly, the director nodded. "You've got something, all right," she said. "We'll need to work on control, but the raw talent's there." Karen's chest tightened. Was that approval? "You're in," the director added. Karen blinked, not trusting her ears. "Wait, what?" "You're in," the woman repeated. "Rehearsals are Wednesdays and Fridays. Don't be late." Karen barely heard the rest. She turned to Rihanna, tears brimming in her eyes. "I told you," Rihanna said softly. "You just needed a chance." The days that followed were a blur of rehearsals and late-night practice sessions. Karen pushed herself harder than she had in years, rediscovering her voice and relearning the parts of herself she'd buried beneath years of fear and sacrifice. But it wasn't easy. There were nights when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, when the weight of her pregnancy and her responsibilities felt like too much to bear. She still had to work shifts at the arena, cleaning floors and scrubbing bathrooms just to keep food on the table. Her mother's health continued to decline, and the medical bills piled higher each week. Karen often wondered if she was being selfish, chasing a dream when so much of her life was still crumbling. Rihanna, however, refused to let her give up. When Karen's voice cracked during a rehearsal, Rihanna stayed late to coach her through it. When Karen doubted herself, Rihanna reminded her why she'd started in the first place. And when Karen broke down in tears after her mother had another bad night, Rihanna was there with quiet reassurances and solutions Karen hadn't dared to imagine. One evening, after a particularly grueling rehearsal, Karen found Rihanna waiting for her outside the community center with an envelope in hand. "What's this?" Karen asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "Help," Rihanna said simply. Karen opened the envelope and froze. Inside were details for a medical care program that offered assistance for her mother's treatment, paid for in advance. Karen's eyes filled with tears. "I can't accept this," she said. "Yes, you can," Rihanna replied firmly. "You don't have to do this alone, Karen. Not anymore." For the first time in what felt like forever, Karen let herself believe it might be true. A few weeks later, Karen stood in the recording studio Rihanna had arranged for her. She stared at the microphone, her reflection visible in the glass window separating her from the control booth. Her hands shook as she adjusted the headphones, but when the music started, she let herself fall into the rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And as her voice poured out into the room, Karen felt something shift deep inside her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming the pieces of herself she had lost and building something new. The first few weeks felt like a dream, a whirlwind of rehearsals, recording sessions, and encouragement from Rihanna. For the first time in years, Karen allowed herself to hope. She woke up each morning with something to look forward to, something that reminded her she was more than just a struggling single mother-to-be. But dreams, Karen quickly realized, didn't erase reality. The aches in her back grew worse as her pregnancy progressed, making it harder to get through her cleaning shifts at the arena. Her manager at the cleaning company had started watching her more closely, complaining about how long it took her to finish tasks now that she couldn't move as quickly. One afternoon, after finishing her shift, Karen was called into the supervisor's office. "We need to talk about your performance," the supervisor said, his tone sharp and impersonal. Karen's stomach dropped. She already knew where this was going. "I've had complaints that you're taking too many breaks," he continued, "and some of the other staff have said you're leaving work unfinished." Karen opened her mouth to protest but stopped herself. What could she say? That her legs ached so badly she could barely stand by the end of the day? That she'd skipped meals just to keep up her energy and still fell short? Instead, she nodded. "I'll do better." The supervisor didn't look convinced. "I need results, Karen. Otherwise—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Karen left the office feeling like a weight had been tied to her chest. When she returned home that evening, her mother was worse than usual. The dementia had left her confused and agitated. She kept asking Karen the same questions: where they were, why Karen's belly was so big, and Karen answered them over and over until the tears finally came. She sat on the edge of the couch, head in her hands, and let herself cry. For the pregnancy she hadn't planned. For the dreams she had dared to hope for again. For the overwhelming fear that it was all about to come crashing down. But the next morning, Karen dragged herself out of bed and went to rehearsal. By the third week, the exhaustion was visible. Karen's rehearsals began to falter, and she struggled to hit the notes she had nailed only days earlier. She saw the glances exchanged by the other singers in the group, the pity, the doubt. During a break, one of the other women approached her. She was young, stylish, and confident, the kind of woman Karen had once dreamed of becoming. "You okay?" the woman asked, her tone polite but distant. Karen forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." The woman looked unconvinced. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean, but maybe you should take it easy for a while. Rest, come back when you're ready." Karen felt her throat tighten. She wanted to scream that she didn't have the luxury of taking it easy. She wanted to explain that this wasn't just a hobby or a passion project, it was her lifeline. But instead, she just nodded and turned away. Rihanna noticed the change almost immediately. After rehearsal, she pulled Karen aside. "What's going on?" Rihanna asked gently. Karen tried to brush it off. "I'm fine, just tired." But Rihanna wasn't buying it. "Talk to me," she said, her voice softer now. "What's wrong?" Karen hesitated before the words tumbled out all at once. The trouble at work, the bills piling up, the way people looked at her like she didn't belong. "I'm trying," Karen said, her voice breaking. "I'm trying so hard, but it's like no matter what I do, it's never enough. And I'm scared. Scared I'm going to lose everything before I even get the chance to make it." Rihanna's eyes softened. She reached out and took Karen's hands. "You're not alone in this," Rihanna said firmly. "I told you that, and I meant it." True to her word, Rihanna stepped in. Within days, she had arranged for a lawyer to help Karen file for temporary disability leave from her cleaning job, ensuring she could focus on her pregnancy and rehearsals without fear of losing her income. She also set up a meeting with a social worker who specialized in dementia care, helping Karen access services for her mother that she hadn't even known were available. Karen felt like she could finally breathe again. But not everyone was supportive. Rumors began to circulate within the choir that Karen was getting special treatment because of Rihanna. The whispers were sharp and cutting, accusing her of riding Rihanna's fame instead of earning her place. Karen heard the comments but pretended not to. She couldn't afford to let them get to her. One day, as she was leaving rehearsal, she overheard two singers talking. "I don't get why she's even here," one said. "She's pregnant and barely keeping up. She should focus on being a mom, not trying to chase a dream." Karen's steps faltered, but she kept walking. That night, Rihanna called her. "How are you holding up?" Karen hesitated before answering. "Honestly, I feel like I'm falling apart." "No, you're not," Rihanna said firmly. "You're bending, not breaking." Karen let those words sink in. She wanted to believe them, to let herself feel strong again. The next day, Karen showed up to rehearsal with a new determination. She stayed late, practicing until her voice was raw. She studied the music harder, pushed herself to the edge and ignored the whispers, and little by little, the whispers started to fade. One evening, as the group wrapped up a particularly difficult piece, the director looked at Karen and nodded. "Good work today," she said. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. Karen walked out of the rehearsal room that night with her head held high, the weight on her shoulders just a little lighter. Still, the struggles didn't disappear. Karen knew there were more battles ahead, more bills, more doubts, more obstacles she'd have to push through. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was fighting alone. And as she placed a hand on her belly and whispered a quiet promise to the child growing inside her, she knew she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for them both. Karen stood at the edge of the stage, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from her chest. The lights above her glowed warmly, casting long shadows that stretched across the polished floor. The audience hadn't arrived yet, but she could already imagine the hum of conversations, the rustling of programs, and the weight of hundreds of eyes fixed on her. This wasn't the arena she had cleaned night after night, pushing mops and scrubbing floors while humming melodies no one else heard. Tonight, she wouldn't be in the shadows. She would stand in the spotlight. And it terrified her. Behind her, Rihanna stood watching with a calm, steady presence that Karen had come to rely on. She was dressed simply, but radiated the kind of effortless grace Karen had always admired. "You're ready?" Rihanna said. Karen turned, her voice trembling. "What if I'm not?" "You are." Karen wanted to believe her. She wanted to hold on to the confidence Rihanna had in her, but the doubts still whispered in her mind. What if her voice cracked? What if she froze? What if everyone saw her for what she really was, a scared, pregnant woman who didn't belong here? But then she remembered everything it had taken to get here. The long nights rehearsing until her throat was raw. The mornings spent caring for her mother, balancing medication schedules and doctor's appointments. The whispered comments about her appearance, her pregnancy, her worth, and how she'd learned to tune them out. She wasn't here by accident. She had earned this moment, and she wasn't going to waste it. The concert began with the choir performing as a group. Karen sang her parts, blending her voice with the others, feeling steadier with every note. But her solo was coming up, and as the time drew closer, her nerves returned in full force. When the choir director called her name, Karen felt the world tilt slightly. She stepped forward, hands trembling, and took her place at the microphone. The lights dimmed, leaving her in a soft, golden glow. She could barely make out the faces in the audience, but she knew Rihanna was there, watching from the wings. The first notes of the piano filled the hall. Karen closed her eyes, and then she sang. Her voice started soft, tentative, but as the melody grew, so did her confidence. She let herself feel the music, the pain, the hope, the longing, and poured it all into every word. By the time she reached the chorus, her voice soared. The fear fell away, replaced by something deeper, something that had been waiting to be set free. The hall was silent, holding its breath, and when she finished the final note, the applause came like a wave. Karen opened her eyes and saw people standing, clapping, wiping away tears. She felt her own eyes brim with emotion, but this time the tears weren't from fear or exhaustion. They were from pride. After the show, Karen was mobbed by people offering congratulations. Strangers told her how moved they had been by her performance, how her voice had touched something inside them. The choir director pulled her aside and said she wanted Karen to consider auditioning for professional opportunities. Karen could hardly process it all, but the moment that mattered most came later, when she found Rihanna waiting for her backstage. "You did it," Rihanna said, pulling her into a hug. Karen laughed, the sound bubbling out of her like it hadn't in years. "I still can't believe it." "Believe it," Rihanna said, "because this is just the beginning." The next few weeks passed in a blur. Videos of Karen's performance began circulating online, and soon people were reaching out. Producers, journalists, even old friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Her story resonated. People saw themselves in her struggle, her resilience, and her triumph. She started getting invited to sing at small events, and with Rihanna's help, she began recording more songs, building on the momentum she had created. But Karen didn't let it go to her head. She kept showing up for rehearsals. She kept caring for her mother and preparing for the baby's arrival. She stayed grounded, reminding herself that none of this had come easily. She also didn't forget the people who doubted her. At one event, she spotted the woman who had suggested she take it easy and focus on being a mother instead of singing. Karen didn't approach her. She didn't need to. The woman's expression as she watched Karen perform said everything. Karen's success was the answer to every cruel word, every rejection, and every moment she doubted herself. But it wasn't revenge she cared about. It was the feeling of finally being seen. Rihanna continued to support her quietly, never stepping into the spotlight. She made introductions, arranged meetings, and stayed by Karen's side whenever the weight of it all threatened to become too much. One evening, after a particularly long day in the studio, Karen sat across from Rihanna in a small cafe. "Why me?" Karen asked suddenly. Rihanna looked up, her expression thoughtful. "Because I saw myself in you." Karen blinked, caught off guard. Rihanna smiled. "I know what it's like to fight for a place in a world that doesn't always want to let you in. I know what it's like to feel like you're not enough. But you are, Karen. You always were." Karen didn't know how to respond. Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed Rihanna's hand. "Thank you," Karen whispered. Rihanna squeezed back. "Don't thank me. Just keep going." Karen left the cafe that night feeling lighter than she had in months. She wasn't naive. She knew there would still be struggles, still battles to fight. But she also knew she could face them, because she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving, and she wasn't finished yet. Karen sat in the hospital room, cradling her newborn daughter in her arms. The soft hum of monitors and the quiet rustle of nurses in the hallway were the only sounds breaking the stillness. Her baby's tiny fingers curled around her thumb, and Karen felt tears slip down her cheeks. Tears not of fear or exhaustion this time, but of overwhelming love and gratitude. She couldn't stop staring at her daughter's face, tracing the delicate curve of her nose and the soft fullness of her cheeks. She looked perfect, impossibly perfect, and Karen felt the weight of everything she had fought through to bring her into the world. The road to this moment hadn't been easy. There had been nights when Karen thought she wouldn't make it, when the weight of carrying a child while rebuilding her life seemed too much to bear. But now, as she looked at the tiny life in her arms, She knew every sacrifice had been worth it. A quiet knock on the door drew Karen's attention. She looked up to see Rihanna step inside, carrying a small bouquet of flowers and wearing the warm, encouraging smile Karen had come to depend on. "She's beautiful," Rihanna said softly, stepping closer. Karen smiled, brushing a lock of hair away from her face. "Thank you." Her voice trembled, but this time it was steady enough to carry the gratitude she felt. "How are you feeling?" Rihanna asked, sitting down beside her. "Tired," Karen admitted, "but good, really good." Rihanna leaned in, looking down at the baby. "Have you picked a name yet?" Karen hesitated, then smiled. "Hope?" Rihanna's eyes softened. "It's perfect." The weeks after Hope's birth were a blur. Karen juggled late-night feedings, doctor's appointments, and rehearsals, but something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt like she was running just to stay afloat. She had a purpose now, someone to fight for, someone who gave her strength even on the hardest days. Rihanna continued to be a steady presence, helping Karen navigate the changes in her life. But their relationship began to evolve, shifting from mentorship to something more like friendship. One afternoon, Rihanna invited Karen to a meeting at a local nonprofit organization. "This is where we start giving back," Rihanna said as they entered the modest office space. Karen looked around, noticing the posters on the walls featuring smiling mothers and children. "What is this place?" "A foundation," Rihanna explained, "for single mothers, women who face the kinds of struggles you have: discrimination, financial hardships, and lack of opportunities. We're setting up programs for education, childcare, and career training." Karen turned to her, stunned. "You're doing all this?" "We're doing this," Rihanna corrected, smiling. "You're the inspiration, Karen. Your story, your strength, it's going to change lives." Karen blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the idea that her struggles might help others. "Are you sure I'm ready for something like this?" Rihanna squeezed her hand. "You're more than ready." The foundation took off quickly, attracting media attention and donations. Karen's story became a symbol of resilience, and people from across the country reached out to share their own experiences. Karen began speaking at events, sharing her journey in a way that gave others hope. She used her platform not just to inspire, but to push for change, calling out systemic barriers that kept women like her from succeeding. And through it all, she kept singing. Her music became a reflection of her life, a blend of struggle and triumph that resonated deeply with audiences. With Rihanna's support, she recorded her first album, a collection of songs about loss, love, and hope. The release was met with critical acclaim, and Karen found herself on stages she had once only dreamed about. But even as her career grew, she never lost sight of what mattered most. One evening, after a performance, Karen sat backstage with Hope asleep in her arms. She looked down at her daughter and felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Rihanna joined her, still glowing from the energy of the concert. "Ready for the next one?" Rihanna teased, leaning against the dressing room counter. Karen laughed softly. "Always." But as she looked at Rihanna, her expression turned serious. "I couldn't have done this without you," Karen said. Rihanna shook her head. "You did this, all of it. I just reminded you what you were capable of." Karen smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Well, you did a pretty good job of that." Rihanna reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from Hope's face. "She's lucky to have you." "No," Karen said softly, looking down at her daughter. "I'm the lucky one." Karen's life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still hard days, nights when Hope wouldn't sleep, mornings when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. But now, Karen knew she could handle them. She knew she was strong enough, and as she stepped onto the stage again, this time with hope watching from the wings, she sang with a confidence that came from knowing she had earned every moment. Her voice filled the hall, and somewhere in the audience another young woman sat listening. Someone who had been told she wasn't enough, who had been made to feel small. And maybe, just maybe, that woman would leave believing in herself a little more. Because sometimes all it took was one voice to remind someone of their own. Thank you for watching this story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Share this video with your friends if it inspired you, and check out the playlist with other stories. There's more to come. We are waiting for your comments. Tell us what you think about this story.